Hello and welcome to the show. This is Everything Under the Sun. My name is Ty. Hope all you're doing incredible, taking care of yourselves, appreciating each and every moment in this life, and living it the way that you want to live it. Because you're the one that's living your life. No one else is living your life for you. Not your neighbor, not your best friend, not your parents, not the people that will judge you, not the people that demand things from you. You are the one that's living your life. So live it the way that brings you the most excitement, the most joy, the most peace. All of the things that you want to experience, try your best to experience them in this life because you're the one living it. You're the one experiencing it. And there are a lot of times I bring up in this podcast, there are these things that seem to keep us from that happiness that we seek or staying in that peace of mind that we seek to stay in. And I like to call these edges of happiness because these are the things in our lives that seem to pervade our experience so much so that we can be in a state of bliss and happiness and joy, and then that thing happens, or that person shows up, or that situation is brought back into our memory that keeps us from moving forward in that next moment with happiness or joy or peace or whatever it is that we wish to have. And it's really recognizing those edges of our happiness that can help us to push those boundaries more and expand that more so that we can be in certain situations that normally would cause us to move outside of that, and we can stay firm in the place that we are, in the happiness that we feel, and the experience that we desire to have in that moment. And again, as I mentioned in the last episode and many other episodes, there can be destruction and chaos and just disarray in front of you. And as you hold that peace within yourself and not allow that to be your edge anymore, then you can live each and every moment more and more in that happiness that you seek. And again, it's first identifying that edge. And we can identify it very easily because when we're not feeling that happiness, when we're not feeling joy, when we're not feeling at peace, that is our edge. And so often we cross that edge and we don't even realize that we're not even in that place that we want to be in anymore. Sometimes we're just aggravated. We're just stuck. We're just sad. We're just feeling these feelings of loss and disconnection. And we just end up there. We don't really remember how we got there. But in the recognition that we are in that place, know that you are at one of your edges. And we have to ask ourselves, is this something I choose to experience? And I know that it seems like it's not a choice always, but these edges that are in our lives are edges that we've created. We've created them because we've allowed them to stay in our experience. We've allowed them to stay in our lives. And whether they were things that were taught to us or things that we have adopted, they're things that right now in that experience that you're feeling that or recognizing that you're beyond that edge or at that edge, this is something that we are choosing again to experience in our lives. These edges are 100% within our control, but not until we recognize that they are. And there are some things that seem like they're completely out of our control and things that naturally are meant to push us outside of that happiness or that joy or that peace. But you can shed tears and still be at peace. There's a friend of mine that took his life a few years ago, and I had a voice message from him. It was a few weeks or months before he had taken his life, and this voice message was the last time I didn't pick up the phone. I remember seeing him calling. It was late at night. I thought, like maybe it was, just a drunk call or something like that, and I didn't pick up the phone. And this was a good friend of mine and still is to this day because of this connection that I feel. But that voice message was something that I had on my phone until that phone broke and I was no longer able to retrieve it. There was a pain that I held, a sadness that I held that kept me from feeling at peace. And, all these things that happen when someone takes their life, like there are many feelings that arise. Maybe it's like, oh, maybe I should have picked up the phone. Maybe I should have answered. Maybe I should have connected more. Maybe I should have checked in more. There are all these things that were going through my head at that time, and I recognized that this was my edge. And at the time, I didn't identify it. I didn't have this edges of happiness type of concept within my head. But I recognized that this was something that was pervading my experience so much that I couldn't even go through the classes in my program. I was going through a counseling program, my master's program at the time, and we were actually in assist training, that's suicide prevention training, and this news came to me during that time. So this crazy alignment of that entire situation falling the way that it did, and I couldn't stay in that class. I had to leave. Like every single moment that they brought up someone taking their lives, it was something that it was triggering for me. And I realized I was being triggered in so many different avenues of my life. And when I was by myself, and I realized that I was feeling so ill because of this edge that I kept allowing to be in my experience. And someone taking their life, it's something that, it's an experience that everyone handles differently. And a lot of that is due to our concepts of death and what happens after that. And, I just didn't know at the time. I didn't know what I believed, and I just realized that this person that I cared so deeply for was no longer in this physical world with me, as far as I noticed. And that was my edge. And it wasn't until years later that I started to really conceptualize this idea of death. And I was always very okay with my own death. It's like I felt like I lived like such an incredible life, and I realized that, like I'd be okay, like I'd be okay not knowing and just passing from this realm, whatever that may be. But people that I loved and cared about, that was something that was very difficult for me. That was my edge. And it wasn't until I started to look at death differently, I started to address that edge of mine and see, is this really the experience that I wish to have, or the relationship I wish to have with this experience that is inevitable within life? And after I realized that I did not want to have that relationship be in such a sorrowful or mournful or separating type of way, I asked myself, what other possibilities can they be? What other possibilities are there within this type of relationship that I can have with death? And I found myself feeling a connection with those that have passed, and not in like a supernatural type of way where I'm like seeing ghosts or hearing voices or anything, but when we connect to those loved ones that have passed on, we can feel a resonance. And maybe this has happened to you with someone that you've lost, or you feel as though you lost, because death seems like this great separating thing, but it's really not. And all of the loved ones that we've ever had, the ones that we've met, the ones that we haven't met, the ones that are still here on this physical world, you and I, we are not separate in any type of way. We cannot be separated in any type of way. And as I started to pay more attention to those times when I would think about that loved one and feel this overwhelming feeling of emotion, of love, of passion, of laughter, because of something I remembered from them, and I felt their presence there. And maybe it was something that happened in the world. Someone said something that was a saying that was always said by that person. And this has happened to you, I'm sure, if you've lost someone and you were reminded of them in some kind of very significant way in this world, whether it was a feeling or a physical thing. You were like, oh, I know that's my grandfather that's still here with me. I know that's my mother. I know that's my father. I know that that's my best friend. And as we give more attention to that and recognize that maybe there's something more than just this physical world, then we can start to shift the way that we're thinking about heavy concepts like death. And we can find ourselves in communion with our loved ones, these ones that have seemingly passed on, and we can feel closer to them than we did in this life, in this physical world. And I say all of this to say that we have edges, and some of them are easier to push out than others. And some are very heavy, like death. And it can seem like that's an edge that's always going to be there. But as we shift that connection towards, how we see this thing, how we feel within it, that is expanding that boundary. That is pushing that edge out a little further to where we have more freedom. We can enjoy our happiness more. Someone can pass on and we can cry the tears that need to be shed. But ultimately, recognize that connection is still there. It's just in a different way. And again, I'm not going to go into death. I mean, there may be another conversation about death and my beliefs and these conceptions about this pervading life that's always here. But essentially, I just wanted to get at the point that there are some things that are very heavy, and these edges that seem very difficult, we can push past them. But it's only until we identify them and ask ourselves, is this something that I wish to continually experience? And if these are edges that we create, then these are edges that we can also eliminate. But it's by asking ourselves that question. And even more so, the question of, if this were to be in my experience every single day for the rest of my life, do I want to feel this way about it? Because that's what it comes down to. We don't think about the rest of our life being lived in some sadness or some misery or anything like that, but we feel it right now in this moment, and then we feel it the next day, and then we feel it the next day, but we don't realize that that is our life that's being impacted. Then sooner or later, a year passes, 5 years pass, and that same feeling that we felt the day that that event happened, we're still feeling it 5 years later. And that's us not letting go or not allowing that edge to be expanded. That's not us addressing that edge that's keeping us from the happiness that we wish to experience. It doesn't feel good when we feel like we've lost someone due to death or them just walking out of our lives. It doesn't feel good because in reality it's not true. We've never been separated from love. We've never been separated from our loved ones. We've never been separated from each other. We live in a world where it seems as though there are a bunch of different people walking around, and we get to have these incredible relationships with them. We get to extend love to all these different parts, but they're just parts of ourselves. They've always just been parts of ourselves. And as we realize that connection is something that is inevitable and always eternal, then even concepts like death can be something that we can push that barrier beyond. And as we allow ourselves to recognize and identify and ask ourselves honestly that question of if we want to choose this experience again, as we do that more and more, we will start to realize that, no, I don't want to experience this again. No, I don't want to hold on to this anymore. And then we can start doing something about it. And doing something about it is really just remembering that peace and that bliss and that joy and that love and that connection that you felt when you were with that person or in that situation or just a few minutes before that circumstance happened. Remember that peace and bring it in that moment. Bring it right there in that moment. And even if you can only do it for a second, then after that second passes, you can remind yourself, holy crap, I just brought myself to a state of bliss after feeling this intense mourning, after feeling this intense pain. Somehow, for a second, I was able to feel the slightest bit of bliss. So maybe I can extend that a little bit further. We are slowly chipping away at these edges towards their elimination, but it's not until we realize that it's there and that we can do something about it that something changes, that it actually begins to change. And I bring this up because this is work that we are always doing. All the things that I bring up in this podcast are things that I'm still doing within my life, and it doesn't matter how long we've been in this experience or how long we've been doing this. There's always going to be something to learn in this life. Like, this life is something so incredible, and new things are always being brought to our experience and our awareness that is teaching us something, that's allowing us to learn and expand and to grow to be the abundant love that we are, the unconditional love that we are. If there are conditions, which are these edges, that are around the love that you can be and extend and feel in this moment, then that is an edge. That is not unconditional love. And it's not something to lament about, but just to recognize. Am I in a state of unconditional love right now? Does it feel blissful? Does it feel joyous? Does it feel abundant? Do I feel happy? And if the answer to any of that is no, then know that there is an edge that is present right now in this moment. And it's not to say that it's bad or it's wrong. It's just to say that it's here. And do I choose to experience this anymore? And sometimes, and this may be something controversial, we feel as though we would not choose to have negative experiences or negative beliefs that feel hindering or that make us feel unhappy. But these are choices that we are making in very, very deep places. These are choices that we wanted for ourselves in our lives. And it can seem like these are things that we would never want, like to feel fear or sadness or any of these very troubling emotions. But we do choose these. And even if you have to think about different types of music or different genres of movies that we choose to experience, we go to movies to be frightened, we go to movies to watch a drama and maybe cry. There are these things that we choose voluntarily to experience that aren't the most pleasant. We're not watching movies just about like comedy and joyousness and peace and love and all these different things that we know that we want for ourselves in our lives. There are sometimes that we choose these experiences or choose to feel this range of emotion that is so incredible. So there's nothing wrong with feeling these things or recognizing that you are at this edge, because these feelings are something so incredible, and recognize that there is part of you that wants to feel them. But we can ask ourselves, do I choose to feel it in this situation? Do I choose to feel it under this circumstance? Do I want to continue feeling this when I'm living this life that I want to be more fulfilling? And as we recognize that we can choose these experiences more and more and push these boundaries more and more, then we have more and more freedom in our lives to live it the way that we want to. And that's really what it is about these edges in our lives. As you chip away at these edges, as you push them back and allow yourself to expand, the peace that you are to expand and pervade all circumstances, then you are more free. You are more free inherently within the fact that these edges are no longer hindering you. They're no longer frightening you. That politician and all of their beliefs and all of their actions, they're not something that brings you outside of that space of peace. You're not getting angry. Your voice isn't getting raised. Your blood pressure isn't rising. There are so many things in this life that it would seem like, yes, it's very reasonable to get upset about this. It's very reasonable to get moved outside of my happiness and my joy and my peace and my bliss because of this thing. But in truth, unless you're valuing yourself not being at peace over being at peace, then that's the only choice that there really is. Which one do you value more? And as we recognize that we value our peace and our joy and the love that we are, then we can start to bring that into each circumstance and each situation. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be changed immediately, but it's saying that that is an edge that we realize is there now, and that we can do something about it. We can do what we want about it. And we can start to live this life that is more free and more abundant and more joyous and more true to who we are, because that's what we all want. So let down these boundaries, expand these edges. Do what you can to recognize when you're not in a place that you don't want to be. You are the one that is feeling this experience. You're the one that's living this experience, and you know best. You know best. You always have, and you always will. So live your life on your path, and realize when you come across something that doesn't feel good, and you're like, you know what, I'd rather not let this be something that keeps me from my happiness any longer. Remove that edge. Remove it so much that you can live your life in joyousness, in the peace that you want, despite anything that's happening around you. So that's all I have for this episode. If you have any thoughts or ideas or anything that you'd like to share, you can send that to everything.sunpodcast@gmail.com. You can join any of the social media groups: Instagram, everything.sunpodcast, Twitter, @everysunpodcast, the Facebook group, @everysunpodcast as well, and the YouTube page, Everything Under the Sun with Ty. And that's all I got. I love you all so much, and I'll talk to you soon.